What are you doing out there in the training ground, you old show-off? The mocking laughter echoed among the young soldiers. But he didn't respond, only silently gripped the old radio in his hand, where his fingers had once trembled from the blood of his comrades. No one knew that beneath his faded jacket was a tattoo forbidden to be mentioned, a symbol of a campaign the government had once tried to erase from the records. He wasn't seeking honor. He only wanted to atone for his mistakes. But when the past came knocking, he was forced to step out of the shadows one last time. Before we begin a story that will keep you glued to the screen, I have a small favor to ask. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy inspiring stories, and don't forget to leave a comment, letting me know where are you watching from and what time is it where you live. It always feels amazing to see the whole world come together just to share a meaningful moment.
Welcome to Veteran Best Stories, where the war ends, but the stories live on. From the foxholes to front porches, we honor the silent battles our veterans still fight. Subscribe and walk with us beyond the battlefield.
No one truly remembered when he arrived at Fort Thornwood. There was no welcoming ceremony, no introductions. One dry winter morning in Colorado, when the snow still clung to the rocky ground, he was simply there, silent, as if he had stepped out of the very mist. His name was scribbled carelessly in the personnel log, the last entry, next to the words, "Temporary Technical Assistant." But no one could mistake that figure, tall and lean, with shoulders once broad now seeming to buckle under some invisible weight. Each step he took was heavy, as if he were treading on memories rather than earth. His cracked leather boots made a dry, snapping sound as he passed through the training ground. The faded khaki jacket, torn at the right shoulder, draped over him like a shadow. He carried nothing but a worn-out notebook and an old radio that hung close to his chest, as if held there not for convenience but out of loyalty. He didn't speak much, hardly ever. He didn't strike up conversations, didn't smile. Yet he was everywhere. One moment checking supply crates behind the warehouse, the next sitting in a corner of the repair shop, wiping down equipment parts as if cleansing something within himself. Whenever something was missing, before anyone could speak up, he had quietly placed it in its proper spot. The younger ones began to notice, but not with respect. They called him Old Nash, a name half true, half mocking, passed around over lunch and cigarette breaks. Some of the younger ones even called him Showman, the war actor, because he didn't teach, didn't command, yet walked the training ground as if it had once belonged to him. His presence was like a question no one wanted to answer. He didn't act out of line, didn't try to fit in, but his silence seemed to pose a challenge. A heavy shadow in a base already worn down by pressure and schedules. Those who had never fired a shot in battle called him the retired general playing a role. But it was his silence that unsettled them most. His gaze wasn't cold or sharp. It was empty, as if he had looked through them long ago, as if someone who had once watched a battle had returned to civilian life and found nothing surprising anymore. And it was that gaze that made them step back. They didn't know who he was, but they didn't like the feeling of being reflected in those eyes. A few older soldiers stayed quiet. They recognized that walk, that posture, things you couldn't learn from a training manual. But they didn't speak up, because at Fort Thornwood the past was something no one questioned. This base wasn't for retelling stories. It was only for sending out the young and burying the old. Old Nash never got angry. When given unreasonable orders, he complied. When called the wrong name, he didn't correct them. When he heard laughter behind his back, he just kept walking, his eyes fixed on a point no one else could see. And then one day, his old radio picked up a strange signal. a frequency abandoned years ago. A name rose from a long-dead memory. Spectre 6. And from that moment, Fort Thornwood would never be the same again. The radio began to crackle from deep within old Nash's jacket pocket, just as the sun touched the frost-covered steel fence. Something in the voice that came through wasn't just a command, it was a call from a time long buried. Spectre 6 is active. Signal from Kilo 9 grid station. Verify identity. He said nothing. He only slightly hunched his shoulders, turned, and walked into the supply warehouse, leaving behind the silent training ground where a few SEAL soldiers' eyes followed him. One of them, Corporal Ramos, stood squinting. Spectre 6? He muttered. The name shouldn't exist on an open frequency. The warehouse door closed behind Nash like a gentle full stop. Inside, light from the window fell across ammunition crates, body armor, and gas masks. Nash set his notebook down on the table, then began to remove his old jacket. His movements were slow, quiet, as if shedding a layer of skin that had grown too tight. As he bent to fold the jacket, his back came into view, hardened, sun-weathered, with a faded tattoo between his shoulder blades. 3 interlocking circles. The black ink had faded but not blurred. Not a pattern, not a decoration, but a mark, etched under the red glow of tactical lights during a campaign never recorded. Outside the window, Ramos was passing by. He meant to call out to someone, then stopped. The glance he threw into the warehouse was no longer curious. It was shaken. A symbol that existed only in classified documents, once mentioned in handwritten notes on faded paper. Spectre 6, not a person, but a designation for those outside the system, yet responsible for decisions no one wanted to bear. He stepped back instinctively, trembling. 2 other soldiers saw his expression and rushed over. They looked through the window, and at the same moment, they recognized the tattoo. In an instant, all 3 understood they had just seen a gateway sealed shut for years. And the man inside wasn't old Nash. He was the reason the lock had been sealed in the first place. They retreated. No words, no discussion. Each step as heavy as stone. In their minds, a single phrase echoed. Spectre 6 has been reactivated. No one asked why. They only knew the world had just shifted in a way no military map could show. Inside the warehouse, Nash continued his work. He checked each first aid kit, wiped down rifle scopes as if every speck of dust was a life. No need to speak, no need for reasons, because he understood what was coming. And he knew the tattoo on his back wasn't meant for anyone to see. It was a vow he had never rescinded. The system had never forgotten him, just as he had never truly left the war. And this time, he didn't need orders. On his back was a tattoo that only those who had walked through darkness would understand. But it wasn't a beginning. It was a remnant. A fragment left from the name he once bore. Lieutenant Charles Ashford, commander of the Raven 7 Special Forces team, part of Operation Black Valor. Black Valor wasn't in any training manuals. It had no mission charts, no medals awarded. Only those chosen knew it had ever happened, and most of them didn't survive to tell the tale. The final mission began with a brief command: deploy the team, rescue a medical unit held hostage in a detention camp near the Syrian border. Intelligence maps showed a small facility, lightly guarded. No mercenaries, no snipers. Just get in fast, get out clean. Clear it, leave no trace, the superiors said. But those pristine maps had been drawn by deceitful hands. The helicopter landed in the dead of night. No lights, no sound. The team fanned out according to the plan. Ashford led the way, never ordering anything he hadn't tested himself first. He had once told his team, "If anyone doesn't make it back, I'll be the one to take the blame first." They reached the camp in 8 minutes. 2 hostages, a doctor and a medic, were found, bound in an underground storage room. But as the team began their withdrawal, an explosion rang out. The guards weren't absent. They were waiting. The exfil zone was locked down. Communications jammed. Bullets began whistling past their heads. Ashford ordered the team to split. Half held the exit, half provided cover to get the hostages out. 3 soldiers, Santiago, Lewis, and Granger, stayed behind to hold the door. They didn't have to, but they didn't wait for orders. They understood. If no one held the enemy back, no one would escape. When the second helicopter reached the pickup point, Ashford practically dragged the hostages onto the deck with his bare hands. His face was smeared with blood, not his own. On the metal floor lay an empty first aid kit and silence. When the team returned to base, no one asked what had happened. An emergency meeting. Cold, clinical questions. He answered with a single sentence. 10 of my men died so 2 could live. The story ends there. There was no investigation, no declassified files, just a brief condolence letter sent to 3 families. And a week later, Ashford vanished from every roster. They said he requested discharge, but no one actually saw him sign the papers. No one knew that he had demanded his name be erased from Spectre 6. A near impossible act, unless something heavier than honor was weighing on his shoulders. And the only thing he kept was the old radio and the tattoo on his back, a symbol not meant for display, but for bearing. From then on, he changed his name, became Old Nash. No rank, no team, no past allowed to exist. But the past doesn't need permission to return. It only needs a signal. Dear audience, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then keep listening to the story. There are still surprising twists ahead. Comment the number 1 if you find the story compelling, so we know you're still with us. After Operation Black Valor, no one called him Charles Ashford anymore. That name was tucked away in sealed files, where memories were locked behind codes and silence. When he left the service, there was no send-off, no formal handshake, no farewell ceremony, just a pale afternoon sun as a man walked out of the military gate as if he had never existed. Fort Thornwood wasn't a place anyone chose willingly. It sat far from civilization, straddling rocky mountains and dense forests, where radio signals faded like human presence itself. But for Nash, the name he chose for his second life, it was perfect. A forgotten corner where those who had done the unspeakable could keep living, without explanation. He didn't apply for a command position, didn't seek recognition for his past. He quietly signed up as a logistics technician. No one asked why. They needed someone to mind the warehouse. He needed a place to stay. It was that simple. From then on, Nash became part of the base's rhythm. Every morning, he checked the ammunition stores, jotting down numbers no one else remembered. In the afternoons, he replaced pins, oiled parts, and marked wear on weapons that ordinary eyes overlooked. The base's map lay spread across an old wooden table, dotted with red marks noting inventory needs and potential shortages. He didn't ask what anyone needed. He just knew, as if he could read the mind of every team leader before they spoke. Some said it was habit. Others joked he had a sixth sense. But no one understood that his precision didn't come from luck. It came from the battlefield. a place where a missing magazine or a minute's delay cost lives. He had miscalculated once, and the price still burned in his chest like a smoldering fire. No one noticed he rarely slept. The warehouse lights stayed on late into the night. On winter evenings, he sat motionless as a statue, staring at the supply distribution board as if reading a mission order. Some began to sense something unusual, but they were busy, and Nash remained the old ammo guy, silent, steady, harmless, until one night. The SEAL training unit held a Level 4 night infiltration drill, the final test before deploying to the field. Harsh terrain, deliberately jammed navigation signals, teams split and dropped scattered in unstable weather. They didn't know that one team had veered off the safe route, slipping into a deadly ravine with no signal, no rescue beacons. While the control tower argued over locating them, while officers pored over schedules, Nash, without a word, left the armory. He didn't call anyone, didn't ask permission. He simply opened the back door, grabbed a first aid kit, an outdated DMR rifle, and vanished into the night. No one knew. No one was told. Because for those who once bore the Spectre 6 mark on their back, a summons never came aloud. The sound of duty was enough to set them in motion. Snow began to fall as darkness enveloped Calico Edge, a deep ravine carved by ancient pines, marked on training maps in faint gray, area not recommended for entry. But that night, a young SEAL team had strayed from the main route. They didn't realize they'd taken a wrong turn until the radio signal faded, the GPS beacon flickered red, and a series of silent gunshots erupted from the opposite ridge. No flares, no guide, only snow falling thicker by the moment, and dark shapes closing in. 3 were wounded in the first 5 minutes. 2 lay behind a boulder, one dragging his comrade with bare hands across the ice. They called back to base, but the signal was all static. The area seemed swallowed by an invisible hand. No escape, no rescue. And then, he appeared. No one heard his footsteps. No one saw where he came from. Just a shadow flashing past the trees, eyes glinting behind a scope. A single shot cut through the wind, chillingly precise. The first target dropped, unable to send a signal. 3 more shots followed in quick succession. No panic, no hesitation, as if the rifle had been born in his hands. The SEALs didn't understand what was happening. They only saw the threats vanish one by one. One of them, face still smeared with blood, whispered, "Are we saved?" But no one answered. And then, he stepped out from the snow. No body armor, no night vision. Just the old, faded jacket and a semi-automatic rifle held like an extension of his body. He signaled, not with words, just a nod, and they understood. He led them down a treacherous slope where every step risked triggering an avalanche. He used only gestures, silently pulling the wounded, guiding the living to safety, marking the exit with makeshift stones. Every movement was precise, as if he'd memorized the terrain long ago. A young soldier named Mahoney tried to ask, "Who are you?" But he didn't answer. He only looked straight into the man's eyes, a gaze that had seen death and returned. When they reached the auxiliary comms post at the base of the hill, the rescue team hadn't even deployed yet. 6 survivors were loaded onto medical vehicles. The older soldiers exchanged glances, all of them sensing the anomaly. No one at Fort Thornwood, not a single soul, had night operations skills at that level. Not a logistics grunt, not an instructor, and certainly not an old warehouse keeper. Mahoney turned back, trying to catch a glimpse of where he'd stood. But Nash was gone. Only a single set of boot prints remained in the snow, One of the team leaders muttered, as if to himself, "We weren't just saved, we were reminded that there are still ghosts watching every step of the young soldiers." Just hours after the rescue at Calico Edge, the story spread through Fort Thornwood like wildfire through dry grass. At first, it was only whispers. A soldier claiming they saw Nash appear in the restricted zone, amidst falling snow, carrying a rifle no one used anymore. Then others described the same gait, the same gaze. But it was the tattoo that sealed the confirmation. When a medic helped Nash bandage his arm, a deep cut on his bicep, his sleeve was pulled up just enough to reveal half the tattoo. 3 interlocking circles, gray ink faded like mist. A senior SEAL standing nearby saw it and froze. He said nothing then. But that night, an encrypted message was sent, bypassing 3 layers of security clearance, straight to the Central Command office in Langley. The response came in less than 12 hours. Name, Nash, not in the official system, but in a sealed black file. That name was once Charles Ashford. Rank, Lieutenant. Unit, Spectre 6. Status, voluntarily missing. Not discharged. Not declared dead. A man like that shouldn't still be alive, and if he was, he shouldn't be at Fort Thornwood. A recall order was issued that night. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just a sealed envelope placed on Nash's desk in the early morning, next to a cup of coffee he hadn't yet touched. No one witnessed the moment he read it. All that was known was that minutes later, he donned his jacket, tucked the radio into an inner pocket, and walked to the high-level coordination building, a place only those with top-secret clearance could enter. They let him in. The command room wasn't large, but its silence was suffocating. A simple wooden table, a few metal chairs, a small window overlooking the distant mountains. There, the Supreme Commander waited. No guards, no papers, no secretary. Nash didn't salute. He didn't stand at attention. He just sat down, slowly, resting his hands on his knees like an old father ready to take blame for things beyond repair. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. The air in the room was thick as ash. Finally, the general spoke a single sentence. "We should have found you sooner." Nash didn't reply. He looked straight at the man across from him. Not defiant, not repentant. Just the gaze of someone who had carried what the entire system once refused to acknowledge. The commander tilted his head slightly, as if catching something in the corner of the old soldier's eye. Then he stood, taking a step forward. No words of praise, no commendations, just a slow nod, the kind old soldiers once exchanged when a battle ended, when survival needed no explanation. And from that moment, Nash was no longer a forgotten name. He was a living testament. That true respect doesn't come from rank, but from the scars one is willing to bear without anyone needing to know. The room was so quiet you could hear the wind slipping through the cracks of the window. Morning light spilled across the wooden table, where a sealed black file was placed gently, like a confession. The red seal was still fresh, the paper's edge slightly curled, as if just retrieved from a place no one dared to open. The commander didn't reprimand. He didn't need to. Instead, he slid the file toward Nash. "Intelligence was leaked," he said, his voice low like sifting sand. "You were set up, Charles. Not because you failed, but because someone wanted you gone." Nash didn't open the file. He didn't need to. The truth for him was never in papers. It was in the eyes of fallen comrades, in the relentless dreams of sleepless nights, in the scar on his left shoulder that no doctor ever asked about. The door behind cracked open. A young SEAL stepped in, very young, still carrying the awkwardness only a 20-year-old could have when facing a truth bigger than himself. He began, voice hoarse. I mocked you. Called you an actor, the old warehouse guy. I didn't know. Nash looked at him. No blame, no forgiveness. Just a gaze that had traveled further than a lifetime, now pausing to rest. Between them, a silence formed. Not from a lack of words, but because there were too many things that no longer needed saying. The next morning, the Fort Thornwood training ground was different. No one gave an order, but soldiers were there by 4 a.m. They didn't line up in formation. They split up on their own, warmed up, cleared the grounds, as if something had been restored. Not by command, but by will. On the main bulletin board, someone had quietly pinned a coffee-colored patch. The stitching was rough, but sharp. 3 interlocking circles. The Spectre 6 emblem, no longer a myth, but a living presence among them. A group of young soldiers approached. No joking, no noise. We want to learn again, one said, his voice so earnest it caught in his throat. This time, for real. Nash nodded, light as a breeze touching the ground. Not an agreement, but an acknowledgement. Some scars only heal when read aloud by those who once thought they'd never understand. That afternoon, the sun pulled itself free from the mountain peaks after days of gloom. Its light fractured across old wooden crates, across boot prints etched in the dirt. Nash stood alone in the middle of the grounds. Someone approached, the same young soldier from before. Do you regret coming back? Nash didn't turn. He only smiled faintly, not a big smile, but enough to soften the last layer of snow in the old earth. No, he replied, because for the first time, I don't have to run from myself anymore. And that was how ghosts became guides. In a noisy world, sometimes the quietest people carry the greatest stories. Nash, or rather, Lieutenant Charles Ashford, didn't return to seek recognition. He returned to forgive himself. And in that journey, he taught us one thing. Honor doesn't lie in how many know your name, but in how you live when no one is watching. Everyone carries scars, some physical, some mental, but only when we're brave enough to stop running from them can we truly begin to live. If this story reminds you of someone who quietly walks on the sidelines, share this video to let them know they're not alone. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. What part of this story touched you the most? Thank you for listening. We'll meet again in stories that are never fully told.